All right. Well, hello everybody. We are back. Talking. I think I have this labeled on my YouTube as "Wisdom from the Old Man." So it's been a little bit, but I just kind of, oh gosh, kicked my phone. I just kind of, I was thinking the other day about something that I really wanted. Obviously, my dad's perspective on, and I thought it'd be really helpful for other people as well. And so I wanted to hop on here and do just a short video on it. But what I want to get your wisdom on today, Dad, is this idea of like theological generosity in ministry or in like a church setting. For a couple reasons. One is that's a very big critique from non-believers as they look specifically at maybe not even non-believers, but like spiritually interested as they look at like Protestantism versus Roman Catholicism, Greek Orthodox. And that's one thing that I've been hearing a lot from students lately is like Protestantism is it's like kind of a turnoff for them because of this thing that's going around of like, well, there's like 4,000 different denominations, and so you guys can't even like be unified together. Obviously, that's not really true in any of the groups, that it's just this totally unified, like that there's not fractures or subgroups within the larger groups like Roman Catholicism. But that's like a big problem people have with our faith, and I guess maybe you could say like flavor of the Christian faith, and it like is kind of a hard thing for people as they survey becoming a Christian, especially. I mean, here we're at a Baptist church, where I'm at now. That's a big problem for people. And somebody, Dad, I've told you this before, but somebody who's like got a lot of weight right now in the Christian world, especially with young people, is this guy named Cliff. I can't ever say his last name. Connectal or something. His last name is so hard, but and he labels himself interdenominational. Not even non-denominational, but and I don't know how much of that is strategic or what, but it's got a lot of traction because these young people are seeing that and going, oh, okay, I don't have to pick between all these branches. This is just an and I'm like, it's probably just Baptist, but just strategic. But I don't know that for sure. So I want to hear, from you, like, because I really admire the way you've approached this in your ministry and in at Living Water there. I want to hear from you kind of the way you've thought through that in terms of, creating a space or like a community that is not. And I don't even know how you would define this, so I might be speaking wrongly, but like, how have you gone about that in your ministry, in the lines you've drawn, where you haven't drawn lines, and how do we as young people approach that in a way that's like prudent and tactful as we do outreach, but also like wise and well thought out and biblical. So yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that general, just kind of your approach, your philosophy.
Yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities for division in all kinds of arenas for churches. Maybe just a general picture. For a number of years, the local LDS church has the ward here has invited us to participate with them in Christmas kind of programs, whatever that might be. Wow. Taught different things, and we've wrestled with that because we've had some inner church dialogue with groups. We had a LDS Bible study meeting in our church. They the moms group, they had a homeschool group that their own ward wouldn't let them meet in their facility. So we've always been very open-handed with our facilities and our campus, and said, come on over here and meet. And so it was kind of interesting, a bunch of LDS ladies with their kids and some
Wow.
kind of different Protestant gals that came together. And that turned into quite a discussion in our church about faith and are we all Christians together? Are we on the same same level? Do we have the same beliefs, et cetera, et cetera? And we actually had quite a theological discussion over a long period of time. We had a class actually that invited their leaders over and tell us what LDS believe, and we're going to share what we believe doctrinally. And it turned out really well in terms of our dialogue, our discussion, and where we landed. We decided we could be cordial with each other and serve one another, but we could not, in good conscience, stand together as having the same gospel.
Yeah.
And it was, in a small town, it was a big deal for us to come to that point where, well, we served them, we let them use our facility, and they were blessed. And it was funny, like their own church had policies against them having a homeschool group in their facility. So they, just because in small town relationships, yeah, come over to our facility and use it. But that turned into quite a discussion over time, and let's serve Christ together in the community, and really that kind of, the buck stopped with me. Like, what do you think, Pastor? Is that doable? And I had to say, talking with our elders and talking with different parts of the church, I said, we just can't have that inner church or that unity in the presentation of the gospel. Like, we don't want to confuse anybody that we are promoting the same gospel, preaching the same word as the LDS church. And so, no, we can't participate in a Christmas program with you. We can't do a one gathering under one roof in the name of Jesus, because we believe you have different beliefs than we do theologically, doctrinally.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal. But nevertheless, there's still friendships that developed among those people and our people with that have kind of moved forward, not under a church setting or not under the same belief system, but a relation. There was respect and I don't know, people taking care of each other's kids, and it was kind of beautiful in some ways. A lot of those people have moved on. A lot of those people have moved away. Their kids have graduated, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, that just an example of some of the situations we can encounter these days.
Yeah.
I think so. There's a lot of area that in Protestantism, especially, that the ugliness towards other denominations, or the we're the only true church idea that comes out sometimes. And there's times and places to make your stand. Like, what hill are you going to die on? What things are essential and what things are
Yeah.
not essential. And of course, like you said, I think the last statistic I saw, there was some 36,000 denominations in the world. Most of those are Protestant.
Wow.
Separations, divisions over the years, and
3,600 or 36,000?
36,000. Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And at some point, it is just what you did there. You laughed because it's laughable.
Yeah.
But how does that happen? I probably, my perspective, my the way I grew up, I wasn't part of a church by choice growing up. My parents, they attended a Methodist church in Bismarck, North Dakota. I think
Yeah.
they got married Nazarene, but their faith was not so deep in terms of committed to a church. My dad did lead the choir at the Methodist church. I don't know if he had an official role with the church or he just did it volunteer-wise, but he was a music teacher and he was able to do that very well. And but once they got divorced, they left the church, and my participation with church ended. So I grew up not having a denominational flag to plant. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have any allegiance to any kind, whether it be Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox or pagan or whatever. I was kind of a mutt, and I was one of the first kids, in my class that had divorced parents in North Dakota. I was kind of an outlier because most of the kids they were Lutheran or they were Catholic.
Yeah.
Or there's some Methodists, some mainline denominations. But I was one of those kids growing up that didn't have a a home, or it didn't have a orientation religiously. And I think that served me well in some ways, because I didn't have this axe to grind. Like it really chafes me sometimes when people say, when you meet people and you start talking about faith, and where they come across as, I'm a Lutheran, or I'm a
Yeah.
Catholic, or I'm a Baptist. Well, that immediately sets a tone of division and separation and distinction. Or I'm Reformed, or I'm this or that. It's I think maybe there's a season in our country, a season in our timeline right here, where that's shifting rapidly. It's shift your generation. I think that is maybe on the way out to a great degree in the general population, but there's still many younger people that they'll take the hill for the Reformed theology, or they'll take the hill for certain theological emphases that they think are super important, where I think they're not so important.
Yeah.
But so that my takeaway coming into the church when I was 19, and just figuring out, like, the relationship with Jesus was the priority, and what kind of church we attended, what kind of a denomination. I was very ignorant of theological issues. I was very just, it wasn't something to turn my crank. It wasn't something I was just very happy that there's the Bible. Here's what God says. Let's do it. Kind of deal. And but then once you get into some of the interpretation of the text, and you become a leader in the church, and you're making authoritative statements, you're preaching. That's where you feel the weight of your interpretation, and the importance of having a proper interpretation, proper
Yeah.
exegesis, and your homiletics really matter, and bringing it out to the people. That's where it shifts a lot. But I think just initially my growing up and my situation, and then moving into leadership in the church, I always struggled with the maybe it's my personality too. I'm generally one of those harmonious types, on the personality tests. Let's just get along.
Yeah.
And so that probably plays into some of my tact, or my way of thinking about interchurch or denominational relationships. I'd much rather give people the benefit of the doubt, much rather be generous and respectful, and we can do things together. I start with that perspective, whether it be the different, whether it be Roman Catholic, or some of the we have a neighbor next door, a Seventh Day Adventist church. The whole slew of different denominations through the years. We can work together until we can't. That's, I start with the idea that there's one church, and God wants us to be unified, and
Yeah.
it's super important for him for that to be. Uh, but there's certain points, of course, that there's enough theological differences and interpretations that you really have to wrestle with what are the essentials, and what
Yeah.
are the things that you can't compromise, or you can't give in on. And that's somewhat of a wild wrestling match as you grow theologically and you study the scriptures. And so I think that there's that. And then there's a couple of very fascinating experiences I had. One was in seminary, where I read this book. I have it on my shelf over there. I think it's the European Reformations. I still have it on my shelf.
Okay.
And it was fascinating for me, because I was ignorant of church history. I was ignorant of some of the things that happened, the Protestant Reformation, and the class that I was in, we read some of Luther, and read some of Calvin and Zwingli, and some of the different reformers. But what was really eye-opening to me was the different countries, had different histories. They had different contexts. Even the borders, we call countries. So many different, with the Catholicism, and the different. I forget some of the lingo, or the language of the day. The Holy Roman Empire, but the personalities of the different regions that the reformers, over the course of 150 years, all these different reformations, and all these different pulling away from Catholicism and the Holy Roman Empire, and how that the different emanations of that, like why in Switzerland did Calvin and these folks go this way? Why in Germany did Luther and these folks go this way? Why the different tweaks, and why the different things that seemed to be priorities to them? And it was eye-opening to me to think about, like, some of our interpretations are driven by our context. Some of our interpretations of Scripture are driven by our history. Some things, like, for instance, the denomination I landed in totally by chance. Just, we had some relatives as I came to Christ, and we had some relatives in a North American Baptist church, German immigrants that fourth generation. They changed their name to North American Baptists from the German Baptists. It was really interesting to think about, like, how did the Baptists come about in a parish church setting where everybody that's born in that parish within that region, they're all baptized as infants. And so this group of people, they came to a different conclusion, that baptism was only for believers, and it really mattered to get baptized in that setting, because it was a statement of, this is a true commitment. If you receive a second baptism, you receive a baptism that could cost you, your life, or cost you your reputation or your community. It really mattered. So in that setting, the emphasis on believers' baptism, it really took on a new level of importance. That maybe in a different setting, someone reading through the Scriptures, they might not see the value of a believer's baptism, or it might not rise to the same level as it did for those early Baptists in England and in the Catholic setting. So that was eye-opening to me. Like, so what was the big deal with Calvin or Luther or these different? When I read that book about the European Reformations, there wasn't just one Reformation. There was all these different Reformations, and a lot of the things that rose to the surface for these different reformers were driven by the context in which they lived, the history of their government, the history of their leaders, and the wars that they fought, and it wild stuff. And so that was humbling, I think, for me, in the sense of, in the midst of being in seminary and studying theology, like, people are using their logic, people are using their experiences, and they're shaping and crafting their theology, not strictly from reading, the pure Word of God. And that was something that, I guess, spoke to me in the sense of the need for humility. Because here these people are dying for their theology, and they're putting their life on the line. Reading about some of the people that are burned at the stake, and reading about some of the imprisonments and some of the horrible things that happened to the reformers and their supporters, and some of the reasons that maybe they died. As I look at it, I'm like, I don't know if that was an essential issue. I don't know if that was a core issue to die for. But from their movement's viewpoint, that was essential, and it was core, and so that really pulled me into the sense of thinking, like, some of the things that rise to the surface in a denomination, they happen over a period of time. They happen because maybe your ethnicity, maybe your the wars that are happening, maybe the circumstances that you're in. They're driven not simply by a good interpretation of the text. There's a lot more to it than that, and so it makes us realize, like, how did the Roman Catholics develop the idea of a papacy? We Protestants say that it happened kind of after the fact. It was a reason to justify authority and power and control. It gave them that leverage. But these things, none of these things happen. The course of our first 5 centuries of the church, and the development of, like our defense of the faith, our apologetics, and some of our theological stances that came through the first councils. they didn't come about simply because someone studied the Bible. They came about because of circumstances and and so it just all that stuff spoke to me in the sense of I cannot, and maybe it's my personality too. I cannot be arrogant about some of these things that are, denominationally so important. In the same time I read about like the Southern Baptist Church. This is something I remember reading in seminary. Like in the same time, like some Southern Baptist churches in the South, if somebody came to their church from a Pentecostal church that had gotten baptized as a believer in a Pentecostal church, they'd make them get baptized again in the Southern
Wow.
Baptist Church because because they're Pentecostal. And that just shocked me and it stunned me. And those things happen among Protestants in different levels. And you understand some of the history and some of the rationale behind it, but I think we need to approach theology and the implications of our theology. Uh, they're huge, and so if we need to be very, very humble and very gracious and give people the benefit of the doubt and really talk these things out before coming into agreements or coming into of separating ourselves from others, because maybe it's I don't know, maybe we don't understand the whole enchilada when it comes to
Yeah.
what God. Anyway, that's one
Yeah.
experience. And the second experience is when we moved to the Philippines, and Elizabeth and I were church planting missionaries. That was our title. We are probably ill cast for that and misfit for that in some ways, but nevertheless, that's what our little denomination thought we could do, and they had a slot open, and we did it. So we moved to southern part of the island of Luzon, Naga City, in the Bicol region, and we started working with some established churches. And what I found there was in that town there was probably maybe 7 or 8 different missionary couples from different denominations that we knew of, that we ran across in different ways, and we were a great minority. Like you, as far as I know, when you were 3 years old, you were probably only one of 3 American kids in that entire region.
Mm.
That they would always come up and look at that white boy, and they'd be stunned. Or Katie, her white hair, her blonde hair, they just couldn't believe it. So we were definitely a minority. And then walking around town and interacting with people, practicing the language, uh, they assumed we were Mormons because there was an LDS church there. And explaining that, it was confusing to people because they had categories, right, that they already put in place.
Yeah.
But there were some indigenous cults there in Naga City and in that region of the Philippines. Some people that had left the Roman Catholic Church that started their own churches. Some were more along the Protestant lines. Some were more cultish. But nevertheless, the Protestants, what I would consider within the boundaries of Orthodoxy, Bible believing, theologically uh, accurate, within they're Trinitarian, for instance.
Yeah.
Some of the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, they fit within some of those things. We started fellowshipping and interacting, and it became very apparent that it would be insane for us to separate and divide based upon some of our denominational distinctives.
Yeah.
I mean, how foolish when you're such an incredible minority and you hold so many things in common to separate on like musical styles
Yeah.
or clothing styles or we developed a friendship with some fundamentalist Baptists,
Mm.
and they were a neat couple. They ended up renting a place down the street from us, and so it was kind of fun hanging out with them. I think they're from Indiana or somewhere, but they would not. We were Baptists, they were Baptist, but because they were fundamentalist Baptist, they couldn't be seen fellowshipping with us in public.
Wow.
In the sense of, because in their hierarchy or their leadership said they don't want to see any, they're the pure church, and they don't
Yeah.
want us to be influencing them or have a reputation of being the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was stunning to me, because doctrinally, other than some of their distinctives, we lined up fairly well in so many arenas, and yet they wouldn't fellowship with us, in a public way, and that was disturbing. But some of the Pentecostals we ministered with, some of the Lutherans, there was I can't remember, I think there was a Church of Christ church group there. There was some other denominational presence of these missionary couples, and we did things together, and we served together, and we broke bread together. We did things that maybe wouldn't happen here in the States so readily, but in that context, in that setting, Christ was the main thing. Christ was the center, and the gospel was the priority. And you quickly learned, or we quickly learned to put aside some of those differences, and it was beautiful and it was sweet. And we could banter about it, we could discuss our distinctives, but it wasn't a competition. It wasn't a like we're better than you, et cetera, et cetera. It was just that realization that we had some interpretations that we inherited, and it was humbling too, in the sense of, so where did you learn your denominational distinctives? Where did you come to hang your hat on this stuff? Well, it was in our church, or it was in our denominational school. And so, humbly coming together and saying, probably you hold a lot of these things that you hold denominationally because of the context of the environment you grew up in, or the school that you went to, where they presented one option that was the best, and the other three options were poo-pooed or put down. And so I guess that was formative for me in terms of working with other groups, or being willing to partner with other groups, was the realization that we've inherited a lot of these interpretations, or we've inherited a lot of these distinctives that maybe we haven't given the other views a fair shake or fair understanding.
Yeah.
And I'm prone to go and try to listen to other understandings and other groups and other teachings, and that there's pros and cons to that. Strong leadership. Some people are drawn towards people that don't ever question anything, or this is the way it is, and let's take the hill.
Yeah.
And I'm not that kind of a pastor and that kind of a leader, and so I know there's probably some people over the years that maybe have wanted me to be more dogmatic in the way I preach, or dogmatic in the way that I lead. We're Baptist, darn it. And that's the best way it is, kind of have that attitude. And, you don't ever enter into any dialogue, but
for sure.
So those are a couple things that stood out to me about that really formed my way of looking at other groups and working with other denominations and other perspectives. Yeah.
So tell me, and this might be a bigger question than we have time for, but I feel like, so I'll just take Reach right now. Like, we have our statement of faith, and everything, generally speaking, the three major branches, being Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant, would agree on as primary, except for the faith alone, grace alone element, right? That what's the, works and grace and faith, and obviously that's pretty core to at least many Protestant division from or much of Protestantism's division from Roman Catholicism. Obviously, I think it's really insightful to go, there was other things that people were dying for and dividing over that probably weren't quite as worth it. But when I survey our ministry and my convictions, that's the one that's okay, virgin birth, the Trinity, sin, original sin of some, former fashion, end time. Like there's this general, 6 or 7 agreements, for Christianity, but that seems to be the one where the break in. I mean, we're going on a missions trip to Rome, and there's a lot of people that are like, "Why the heck are you going on a missions trip to Rome? They're all Christian." And so walk me through that. Um, Obviously there's some sensitivity here for us because this is like we've got family and stuff in this realm, and so but walk me through how you think through that. And I have, well, actually, maybe let me give you this. So I saw a video by D.A. Carson, and I'd love for you to like comment on it. He was talking about this similar idea, Roman Catholics, Protestants, and he maybe it was more around assurance than it was. Maybe I just applied it to this situation, but he was talking about the Passover and how, all these Israelites are told, put the blood on the door, and then he gives 2 different situations where there's one who put the blood on the door. It was about assurance. It wasn't about Roman Catholicism, but this is where my mind went with it. Um, one of these Israelites puts the blood on the door, and they sit back and they go, praise the Lord, I am safe from the wrath of God. And they're totally relaxed, and they're like trusting, essentially. And then you got another one who puts the blood on the door, but they're inside the house like going crazy, like trying all this other stuff to make sure that the blood actually works. And he was talking about assurance and the idea of like the one Israelite being like, why aren't you just confident? And what? But I thought through this in terms of Roman Catholicism, like, is that applicable in the sense of like, but it's hard because then you go, well, are we adding things into salvation and therefore not trusting in the blood? So walk me through how you kind of think through that one, because I feel like that's one of the big struggles, even on just online Christianity. Is that like mutuality? Like there's a lot of folks right now tackling the pro-life movement from both sides, being the Protestant and the Roman Catholic, that are really unified together. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but like that's always an awkward piece there of like how unify. And so walk me through that from your vantage point.
Well, of course, we went to the Philippines. It's a Roman Catholic nation. They claim that, at least. There's a lot of diversity there now. But we looked at it as, and some of our family members wondered, why would you go to a Christian nation and be missionaries?
Yeah.
And in our take on it was, the Roman Catholic Church is a huge organization, more than 1 billion people, and there's, like as you alluded to before, there's a massive amount of church within that church, different views and different understandings and different theological perspectives. It's not like this monolithic, unified body by any means.
Yeah.
In the Philippines, there's what our experience was. You could talk to a Filipino, and they could probably explain it better. But the idea that the Roman Catholics came in and they brought the high God, the God of the Bible to the islands, and they brought, you need to worship this God, but they never dealt with the people's worldview, the people's basic understanding of reality. And so the Filipinos kind of, and again, talked to some Filipinos, and it's been a long time since the Catholics, the early 1500s, I think, is when they really got established there. But the Filipinos, the different islands, they adopted the Roman Catholic God, but they never let go of their traditional religion, the animism, the different beliefs and the different spirits, and so there became this hybrid kind of religion that came about. And so the Catholicism, as you look at what happens here in the States compared to what happens in Mexico or Central America or the Philippines, it can be quite dramatically different in terms of the everyday practices of the believers, the so-called Catholics. They might be Catholics, but many of them are Catholics in name only.
Yeah.
They practice a different religion in very practical ways. So we wrestled with some of that, in terms of the the respect, the honor, the dialogue that you give people. Like, we don't want to be just coming at it from our own perspective, and our definition defines everything. We really felt in talking to people that they really authentically believe different than what the Christian faith was. So hopefully we did that with integrity, and we are dwelling in truth. But when it comes to some of the big issues, like if the local parish, the Roman Catholic parish here, if they wanted to do some interchurch work together, I would very strongly have a problem with that. In one capacity is, are we saying we have the same gospel?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where the rub comes in. And as you alluded to, the justification by faith was a huge issue in the general period of the Reformation for many of the reformers and the different reformations that went on. And we still have that issue today. Is it faith alone, or is it faith plus works? Faith, the tradition plays a big part in that, and the authority of the Scripture versus the authority of the church, and there's a lot of deep waters to to paddle through together. What can we stand on together? What arenas can't we stand? And I think there's a lot of the social issues, like maybe there's some point or some place where, if there's a Muslim group in our town, maybe we have some of the similar values when it comes to family, or if we could identify some of those things to work on together. Maybe we could do some kind of a joint project even with Muslims, and certainly we're much closer to the Roman Catholics as Protestants, and they have a lot of, but it goes both ways, right? It's like the Catholic Church has a lot of issues with us as Protestants.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right, and so that entering into that relationship, it goes both ways, and if we come, I think, if we come at some of that stuff with an arrogance, like, oh yeah, we've got it nailed down, and you guys are the fanatics, or you guys are the ones that are just missing the boat. That's pretty hardcore. Some people don't bat an eye. You look at some online pastors or preachers or teachers, and they never hesitate. Like, there's no give, there's no take, there's no dialogue. It's like, we're right and they're wrong. Let's go get them, and if they don't conform to our way of thinking, they're out of here. And I just that mentality is just, of course, we do have a lot in common, the essentials of the faith, and as you mentioned, and so we can build on that. Where do we stand together? What kind of things? Obviously, that beyond monotheism, we have a long way. We're a long ways off from Islam, right? But with Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodox, we have a lot, or the different Orthodox streams, we have a lot more in common. We can build on a lot there. But I think that issues, especially of justification by faith alone, or justification through faith and works, that issue is going to continue to plague the interchurch, as Connect said, the interchurch kind of perspective. It's going to plague that unity into the near future. And it's there's been some groups that have tried to, over the years. I got another book on my shelf. I'm trying to see it. I can't remember the author's name, but have tried to bridge that gap before, and it's usually in this age of kind of online internet, it gets blown out of the water from both sides, because everyone has a YouTube channel and everyone has a social media take that, and it just stirs people up, and it prohibits dialogue and prohibits discussion. And I don't see a lot of hope for the different streams coming together in this matter anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think it's, there was a book I was just looking for. I just had to move to plug my phone in. But it was who's that guy? He's dead now. He was the Chinese guy. Sue. You know what I'm talking about? He writes the. Dang it! It's somewhere on here. I'll find his name. But he writes this book, his little book. I don't even remember what it's called. I read it a year or two ago. It's real small, but he talks about this idea of um, it not salvation not being a system or a an equation that you have to walk through the right steps of, but a person uh, in Jesus who you meet and follow, by faith. And that stood out to me in the sense of, to your point of the air you breathe plays a large part in where you land. There might be somebody who exists in a Roman Catholic context who meets Jesus and follows Jesus, puts his faith in Jesus, his or her faith in Jesus, and that's the only Christian thing around, and it's like, well, I'm going to go worship this Jesus, and like in community, and so I think I like your answer and the kind of um, dialogue and a sense of I don't know if you necessarily said, but like a celebration of, man, like you're saved by faith alone, and there's a lot of freedom in the gospel. Like what we believe the good news is, and that your faith saves you, not how well you perform. But then there's also this understanding of people just breathing different air and finding themselves in different contexts, and also a variety in the parish by parish and the emphasis on faith and works and stuff like that. And like I said, like we obviously both have a lot of connections family wise and all that who are in that Roman Catholic world, and so there's obviously a desire on both of our parts to walk that out in a not in a disrespectful way or like a I can't believe you way, but like a way of respect towards them, and the theological conclusions they've come to as they read the Bible. So yeah, that's really helpful. Any just last tip or yeah, word as you know tie a bow on this conversation that you'd want to get out there and not be like, oh, I should have said that or that, that sort of stuff.
I'll think about it after we're done, of course.
For sure.
Yeah, but I don't know. I really the gospel is core. We have to make sure that that is the mission of the church is to make disciples, and the reaching out to people to invite them to faith, the discipling of people, the sending of people. The gospel is core. It's got to be central to what we do, and so it's a worthy endeavor in effort to make sure we have the gospel. So there's nothing wrong with being theologically accurate. There's nothing wrong with pursuing, trying to be as precise as possible about what the gospel is and what it's not. We see so many instances in Scripture, even in Galatians 1, with the Apostle Paul is so strong about if you hear another gospel other than the one I've preached to you, it's false. Don't get rid of it, reject it. There's one gospel, and so even though I would like to, can't we all just get along? We can't ultimately go there. We have to stand for the gospel, and we have to suffer for the gospel. We have to sometimes separate ourselves from other gospels because there are false teachers out there and there's false gospels out there. I would just say that in the setting that we're in right now you can go to YouTube right now and hear 1,000 different voices, and everyone's got their own axe to grind. Is be very humble about your stance. I mean, as I read through the scriptures, I don't know how many times I've read through the Bible, how hundreds of times I read through the New Testament, and there's still sometimes questions that come to my mind about what does this mean, or what's the weight here? What's the takeaway here? I wish, God has given us the Bible He's given us. I would prefer a much more systematized Bible.
Yeah.
Like page 1 through 5 is the Trinity. Page 6 through 20 is the distinctions of the Trinity, or the
Yeah.
notes kind of thing. But that's not the Bible. God. So the Bible comes to us in context. It comes to us in history. It comes to us through people, inspired, of course. But reading through the New Testament, it's like so many of the epistles are written in situations, and they're addressing some of the problems, or some of the issues that particular church is having. And so we get the gospel oftentimes. We're listening in on like a third party, and when the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, or James is speaking into an issue, that they're not writing it to us
Yeah.
in a straight way. They're not giving a lecture to a class.
For
They're
sure.
dealing with a particular people, a particular place, a particular time. The gospel is true. It's the universal principle there, that it's true for everyone, everywhere, uh, whatever culture, whatever time, whatever people, with whatever ethnicity. But I struggle some in terms of the you look at the weight of history and the length, 2,000 years now with the church, and some of the things we wrestle with. It should, even the centuries in the first part of the church. How many centuries did it take for us to arrive on what, the Trinity, and some of those issues? And even in, I think it was the 11th century, when the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church divided over that issue of, does the Spirit proceed from the Father, or proceed from the Son, or from both, or some of those issues. Like, there's so much depth in some of these things that, yeah, we have to hold on to the essential gospel. But I mean, if you think you've got it figured out, and you think that you're the one true church, and you've got everything just aced, and everyone else is, you know, their nuances are all just foolish, I think that's a very keen time to repent, and maybe a keen time to be humble in your orthodoxy, and move towards people in grace and humility, and not be that guy that is the know-it-all, because you're going to answer to God one day. Like, kind of like Job, in the litany of questions that God asked him. Where were you when this
Yeah.
happened? And did you really understand, like in the 17th century, when those Moravians were doing this or that? Did you understand where they were coming from? Or the Amish, when they went down that certain road of their theological emphases? Were you there to understand some of their first leaders' take on things? You weren't. And
Mm.
it's just it's very humbling. But nevertheless, we do need the land, and we do need to be firm in our faith. And so that, as you alluded to, I think the traditional kind of take on things is the first level issues. What are the core issues? Most of the churches we serve, or the nonprofits that we're part of, there's a statement of faith or a statement of orthodoxy that tries to identify those things. And what I've noticed within Protestantism is most of those are pretty unified.
Yeah.
They cover the statements of faith. They cover a lot of the same ground, the
Yep.
same issues, and their distinctiveness is only in style, not in substance.
For
And
sure.
so those first level issues, we are so much more unified than it appears, with all the different
Yeah.
churches, right?
Definitely.
And so I think most of the time, like, we had a season of meeting with the local Assembly of God church, and fellowshipping with them, and we've been able to fellowship with other churches in our valley, because when it comes to the secondary issues, or the even the further issues down the road, the tertiary issues, as you said, those things, if you got the right spirit and the right love for one another, you can set those things aside for the core teachings and the core truth, that relationship with Jesus. Um, and we can do such a better job of being unified and being faithful at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, agreed. That's all really, really helpful, and I think will help people think through things in a much more loving and gentle and mostly humble way. And so I think that was really helpful. So thank you for your time, and yeah, I really appreciate your wisdom and your insight as you lead, obviously in your context, and I think that heart will make a big difference. I'm speaking for like my generation. I know that that's an attractive posture in a very divisive world. So it's very much appreciated by me, and I am eager to embody the same type of grace and firmness on the right things, but grace on some of those things that don't have to be such a booger about. So yeah. So thanks, Dad. I really appreciate you.
Okay, love you. See ya.
Bye. All right.